Hi, everybody. My name is Gravity Goldberg, and I'm here today as the author of the book Teach Like Yourself. And I invited some of the bravest, smartest, and kind-hearted people I know in educational leadership to sit in on a conversation today about teacher authenticity. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with introductions and then have a conversation. And I'm going to be totally honest with the goal. The goal of this conversation is that every educator across the world, I'm very ambitious, feels comfortable and willing to lean into who they are as a teacher and to bring that into the classroom every day. Because when teachers feel confident to show up like themselves, it gives permission for students to do the same. But I also am not naive enough to think that's without its tension and challenges, and we're going to lean into all of that today. So I'm going to get quiet for a moment and let the group on the call introduce themselves.
I'm Amy Kazes, principal at Hillside School in Hastings.
Hi, I'm Brad Siegel. I'm superintendent of Upper Saddle River School District.
Hi, my name is Michelle Bulla, and I'm an English teacher and high school department chair at Monroe Woodbury High School in New York.
Hi, I'm Elaine Schobert. I work in North Carolina at Rockrest Elementary School, and I work with coaching teachers and students both.
Hi, I'm Brooke Benavides. I'm the K-12 English coordinator for the Nutley Public Schools. I'm excited to be here. I spent 12 years in 8th grade, and now I have the opportunity to work in the classroom with K-12 teachers.
Hi, I'm Andrew Matteo. I'm the Director of Curriculum in the Ramsey School District in Ramsey, New Jersey.
And I'm Ariel Bartlett Curry. I'm an editor at Corwin, and I worked with Gravity on this new book. So I'm excited to be here.
Excellent, thank you. So my first question that I have is kind of a big overarching question, and I'm curious from each of your perspectives, your perspective on this idea of why do you think it's important for teachers to be their authentic selves in the classroom?
So I'll start. I think there are a lot of reasons for this. It's easy to observe teachers and think like, I want to lecture like this one, and I'd like to run cooperative groups like that one, and I want to be funny like somebody else. But the idea of mimicking somebody else's style puts you in a position of potentially being lost. And the reality is that teachers, I think, are easily lost to begin with in a job, a career, a vocation where we are serving other people. It's so easy to lose ourselves. And so then to create a persona, or the idea of a persona that is not who we are, just sort of deepens that. And students pick up on that so easily. You know, they call us out immediately. And so where we are called to cultivate voice, it's one of my core beliefs as a teacher, is that my role is to cultivate somebody else's voice. If I am not cultivating my own, and I'm not confident and secure and demonstrating my passion and my expertise, then I don't have the same buy-in from my students that I might otherwise have.
I agree. I think authentic is genuine and credible, and we don't have that credibility with our students or with our colleagues if we're trying to match somebody else's vision. So when we own our own vision for our students and for our teaching, then when we see our students being successful, we get to reap the rewards. But if we're thinking that our teaching has to match somebody else's vision and we see success, then it's really them that we don't get to say, wow, this is really rewarding what we're doing. And with education so exhausting like it is, we can't stay the course if we're thinking we're living up to somebody else's vision.
I also will pop in here. I also think that it's so important that teachers have the opportunity to be who they are, because each one of them is so special and brings something so unique to our school. And it really models for our kids the fact that everybody has unique gifts, and each of those gifts contribute to our classroom community and our school community.
Just coming from a few different perspectives, having worked with high school students in the past as a former teacher, they are so incredibly insightful on being able to pick up on BS, and they will call you out if you're not being yourself. And it's something that, I notice happen to myself even as a teacher several times. The students, how insightful they could be on whether or not you are being authentic or not, and you owe it to them to be that way. And on the other side of it, as an administrator, having observed people that I get a chance to work with on a daily basis, and then seeing a different persona on stage than I do outside, I can tell you that quite frequently I'll give teachers advice that the person who they are is better than the person that they're presenting, and the students deserve to see that person.
Building off of that idea, I'm just thinking so much about life is being connected to ourselves, being connected to others. And so much of that is having the confidence to be able to be yourself. And just as I'm actually in Zoom for the first time today, I entered this not confident. My video didn't work, and usually I'm pretty technologically savvy, so that was kind of a blow to my ego as I came on today. But as I think about it, and I'm sitting here in this chat, I'm thinking just be you and don't compare yourself to even the other administrators who are speaking. So I think we live in a state of always questioning and doubting and wondering, are we good enough? Do we have the confidence to be, are we enough? And I really think just as humans, we experience that. And what I've learned so much just from being an educator and being a leader is that we have to connect with people with who we are and where we are and be real and be in the moment and be honest about, the moments where we know something, the moments where we don't know something. And that's part of just being a lifelong learner. And that's what I think I embrace in life. I'm thinking of even a story. It was the first day of school. I had 8th grade students. It was my double literacy block, period 7 and 8, and my heel broke off 10 minutes into the lesson. And here I am with one heel on the floor, and I didn't know if I should take my shoe off, acknowledge it, keep going. And I remember saying to the kids, you know what? This is really a great thing that happened, because life is spontaneous, and that's kind of what this class is going to be. And I'm actually a trendsetter. You're probably going to see this in a magazine soon. And I just embraced it. We laughed it off. The kids were like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But I was just myself. I didn't try to pretend it wasn't happening. I just said, this is what's happening. This is where I am. And I went with it. And I think so much of being a fantastic educator is embracing that uncomfortability and vulnerability and being confident enough to connect with students in a real way.
I would echo what a lot of people have said already, that the students pick up on the authenticity right away. And then the other thing that I would add is that it's easier to be yourself. It's very hard over 180 days to keep up a facade or to play a part. Not to say that there's certain days where teachers and educators don't have to kind of like filter out the noise and kind of put on that brave face or even act. But over 180 days, the kids are going to pick up on it, and just better to have yourself be the one out there.
So I love that we're talking about making mistakes and how, being ourselves means that often we make mistakes. So I'm just wondering what, from your perspective, what are some things that leaders can do to make school a place where teachers also have the ability to make mistakes and be their authentic selves without kind of that fear component of it?
Well, I think a leader can be like really explicit with his or her staff about what mistakes what mistakes are okay, or like where there's risk taking is involved, where there's kind of some non-negotiables. Gravity talked before about like the tension between teacher autonomy and organizational initiatives. That's something that's really interesting to me, and maybe we'll dive into that later. But just being really explicit with your teachers about, this is kind of a non-negotiable, but here, play, be risky in this realm.
We talk about failing intelligently, and the idea that when you make a mistake, if you learn from it, in fact, it ended up being a great opportunity. So really giving our teachers the ability to feel empowered to try new things, because ultimately those risks that they take often end up being the best opportunities for learning for our kids. So I would encourage our teachers to try new things, to have their students try new things, and ultimately grow and learn from them.
Just a few things to add. Well, first of all, I think you have to expose your own vulnerabilities and mistakes, and I think that's something that Gravity, probably one of the most interesting aspects of the book were the examples that she gave. I think there was one with a student that she worked with, or another teacher that she had worked with, who she just didn't seem to see eye to eye, and she confronted her, and really taking on those situations where you feel vulnerable and you might put yourself out there, or the student who wrote that note about her in her teacher ed class. I think that as leaders, we have to expose our mistakes, and that's something that have felt comfortable doing in the past, and without making a big deal about it, just as a matter of fact. And then there's another aspect to this that I think is important, that something that I have thought a lot about, is that we often give praise or support to teachers that are just good employees and follow the rules. And I work in an environment where compliance is very much the norm. Sometimes celebrating people who do break the rules, who might disagree with you, or who might stand up against your authority. I think that's important to do. At the end of the day, for me, the only important thing is that the person in the classroom is a great teacher. And if they're not always necessarily a great employee or always compliant, that's something that we have to accept.
I think there's also, oh, sorry.
That's okay. You go ahead. I'll mute.
I think there's also the humbleness that we can have as leaders, or as colleagues, to be able to say, hey, I saw you doing this in your classroom and I didn't think of it that way. And just acknowledging when you see teachers doing something a little bit different than maybe you had envisioned it, or that you saw some of the other teachers doing, and you saying, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. Tell me more about that. And that kind of just gives teachers permission to say, oh, well, it's okay for me to step out and try it a little bit different, while still holding the non-negotiables of what our goals are for our students, and keeping student-centered.
Just building off of that idea, I think it's so important for new teachers, or just teachers in general, to find their safety, find their safe place, find the people that they connect with, or the people that inspire them to kind of be themselves and make mistakes. And I think the challenge with the administration piece is that sometimes teachers need permission, right? And I should turn my ringer off, I apologize. Sorry. So we need, this is real life, right? So we need permission to make mistakes. So often what I will do is I will talk to our teachers and just say, what are the things you're worried about? What are the things that are holding you back from maybe being your best self? And maybe what teachers might need to do in order to embrace mistakes, or have those conversations in order to build trust, to build some confidence and get permission, so to speak, in order to embrace the newness of the position or the newness of the curriculum, because it could be a veteran teacher or it could be a new teacher. And I think we all sometimes experience moments where we're not sure, what are we doing? I want to take a risk, but I might be observed and I'm worried. So I think verbalizing that, having conversations and building the confidence in order to get messy with the work, which is what we need to do. We have to get messy with the work in order to learn, reflect, and then make informed decisions moving forward.
It sounds like a lot of what we're talking about, and a lot of what I think relative to this topic, is creating a professional culture and cultivating professional culture. And in a professional culture, we don't expect everybody to be the same. We don't expect everything to go perfectly all the time. We expect that we are, as professionals, always learning and always growing. And so as leaders, there are things that we can do as leaders and things that we can do as teachers. And on the leadership end of this is not only acknowledging the failures or the trials or the things that we are feeling really vulnerable about, but it's also modeling the behavior of taking risks and trying new things, and walking into a meeting, or leading a meeting, or starting off a meeting with a conversation about, well, we've been talking about X, conferring with high school readers, and here's what I tried the other day, and it went kind of okay and kind of not okay. What do you guys think? And, has anybody had a similar experience? And just that very behavior of being in front of a group and sharing all those things is really powerful. I think the other thing that we need to do as leaders is to model and invite people to explore and play. And so in the context of a professional culture, that is getting out of the classroom, finding things to attend, whether it's a conference or whether it's far more local, like Lunch and Learns and webinars that you might watch together, or facilitating opportunities for people to do peer observations when we're talking about a new topic or a new initiative as a group. And then debriefing about those things afterwards, because in the debriefing of things new, you create an environment where people feel much safer about saying, I tried this, it bombed, even the kids said it was awful. How can we go about doing something new? And, on the teacher end is then the ability to see yourselves as human, which is really what Gravity's, what your book is all about, is seeing ourselves as human beings as we are growing and changing and evolving, and being concerned about that. And I think just the passion alone to grow and to evolve allows people to try. And trial is really where this all begins, trying and playing with new concepts and curriculum and, philosophies and curricular materials and benchmarks and, all sorts of things. And so I really do feel like this is a lot about the culture that is created in a particular environment. And, it's tough to find it if the leadership in a building is not providing it, but it doesn't mean that it can't be initiated by those of us who are in the trenches, when we're in the classroom, to seek out those who, are a good sounding board, or somebody who is willing to take a risk with you and say, all right, so let's plan this together and let's go try it. And then we'll talk about it afterwards and see what happens.
Jumping off of that idea of really having teachers work together to take risks, one of the greatest successes that we've had is having teachers work together in lesson study, where together they create a lesson that might be completely different. They go into one classroom and it's a collaborative lesson that they've created, but one teacher takes the role of teaching it while the others pay attention and kind of take notes. Then they come back together and they give feedback on the lesson, and then they try it in another classroom. And that's been very beneficial for our staff because it takes some of the pressure off of the individual teacher and it really focuses on the instruction.
So part of what I was thinking about as you were all talking is, and I'm forgetting who said this now, I think it was Andrew, this idea of how do we make things explicit, right? So I heard a lot of strategies there, like being vulnerable, sharing our own mistakes, willing to take risks, carrying a playful attitude, getting peer and teacher collaboration. And yet that fear might still really be there, right? Like, I'm not going to have you raise your hand, but how many of you thought about like what you were going to wear on this video call, or, who are the other people who are going to be there, right? Like, there's this tension that we might have between like wanting to be what we want our students or our teachers to be, but also not losing ourselves in that process. And it feels to me like almost, like straddling all these different worlds of like, who am I, but also who is it that this person needs me to be and this person needs me to be. And I think sometimes what we can lose in all of that is, wait a second, like, who am I again? And so I guess what I'm curious about is if you have any strategies that you think are different, or if you think they're similar for brand new teachers who are still trying to figure out what their teacher identity is, and then experienced veteran teachers who maybe over the years might have lost that inner compass or kind of lost their way in some ways for who that even is. So I'm curious if you want to share a little bit about either of those groups, or maybe your strategies are the same for how you would support teachers to be themselves early on or later on in their career.
I'll start. One thing I definitely have noticed is I've had, in my previous role, I'd worked as a director of curriculum and as a supervisor for 7 years before that. and I in each of those roles, and even now, I have a great deal of input or involvement with our new staff and our induction process and our orientations. And I definitely feel like I have a harder time understanding the needs of our newer teachers than I ever did. So I'm, at a point now in my career where I'm over 20 years, and the sort of identity and ambitions of a new teacher back then, I thought were very different. And trying to motivate teachers today, I find it harder than newer teachers. I have an easier time trying to get to understand the profile and interests of someone who's been more veteran or who's been in the classroom. So for me, I'm still navigating, I'm having a hard time in terms of professional growth of what new teachers need to inspire their growth. They have different interests than teachers have had in the past. And I'll just start with that.
One of the things that we do is really think about making sure we're honest. That I think that's the thing that helped me the most build relationship with the teachers that I work with and my students both, is that I promise them that I'm going to be honest with them so they don't have to guess what I'm thinking. When I first started working with coaching some teachers, I would walk around with my clipboard and watch them and watch the students and write down these notes. And I thought, the note, I knew it was for me, like directing what I was going to do next. And it was like my evaluation for myself, but I didn't think about what the perspective of the teachers would be watching me come in with my clipboard and a serious face and write these notes down and then turn around and walk out. And so then, they said, I just need to know what you're thinking when you come in. And what are you thinking about my kids? What are you thinking about me? And so then I just started leaving like sticky notes of if I didn't have a chance to talk to them because I didn't want to interrupt their instruction, I would just leave them a sticky note like, hey, let's talk about this later. Or I thought this was really interesting that, or I heard you say this to a student and here's the impact that you didn't notice when you walked away after they said it, so that they knew what I was thinking. And then that just kind of built this relationship of trust between us because they knew they could count on me to be honest. Sometimes it was honest like, hey, we need to think more about this. Sometimes it was honest like, wow, there's some awesome things going on in your classroom and why don't you share with your partner across the hall.
Are you on? I also think about the idea that there's not one way. And I think that that is something that I would use with both of my new teachers and my more seasoned teachers. There are multiple ways in order to provide instruction to kids, and there's not one student, there are many students. So some of my newer teachers have some of the best ideas, and they add so much vision and passion and excitement to a team that's been intact for a while. And my seasoned teachers have the experience that they really understand the instructional process and they can help guide some of the new ideas. What we've learned is that the sum is often greater than its parts, and really by having all of our teachers collaborate and work together, one idea turns into an even better idea from so many voices.
One idea I keep thinking about, when I first came into teaching, it was always this idea of the veterans kind of knew best, and you were the newbie and you had to sit back and learn and watch them and then kind of follow their lead. And one shift that I've been experiencing and observing is more of this collaborative spirit that comes into the teaching practice. So we'll have new teachers that come in, and I'm thinking of one in particular who's new this year, who's kind of revitalizing some of the veteran teachers and doing things that the teachers never, they're like, what is that? I want to learn that. So I think what's so important is that we shouldn't be separating almost this idea of new and veteran. We should be looking more at this idea of we're all teachers and we're here for a purpose, and how can we kind of inspire each other and strengthen each other and be vulnerable in the moments where we're all vulnerable and continue to learn. I'm proud of the team we have here because one thing that allows us to do some of that work is that we've been bringing Gravity in for the past couple of years. We're really building their strength to understand best practices, and we are fostering more of that growth mindset so that teachers are willing to take risks and teachers are willing to share successes and share their vulnerabilities so that we can embrace the new person without fearing that this person may, challenge us or make us look less than. And instead the teachers are saying, wow, how can I learn? I think that's so important for all of us to kind of encourage teachers to bring who they are and maybe inspire veterans and newbies alike.
For me, this connects both populations of teachers, the brand new ones, as well as those that you're referring to as maybe burnt out or just a little bit, or a lot overwhelmed by everything that just sort of assails us on a regular basis. And, I think that this is a lot, is still very much connected to having a professional culture and cultivating that. But I also feel like it's very much the same thing as what we try to do with students, which is cultivating voice. There's just so much that I feel lately is coming back to this. And so in this case, you're talking about cultivating the voice of a new teacher. How do we draw them in and give them a place to share their ideas, their passions, their, what's brand new, hot off the presses kind of thing, as well as learn from those that are around them. And it's about being able to give voice to all of these people. So, in terms of motivating and working with new teachers, in my district and in my department, we're very conscious about that and very careful about that. So not only do, for example, like as a department chair, I meet with brand new teachers once a week, every week, until they hit the point of tenure. And then after that, it's entirely up to them. And they also simultaneously have a mentor in the department who is disconnected from me, who they can go to and not fear any sort of like, oh my God, so-and-so threw a desk in the room, I don't want my boss to know kind of thing. And that the message, or sort of the silent and unspoken message, is we are invested in you and your best success. And so we are going to spend time on that. We are going to spend money on that. And the expectation, then the culture evolves from that to be one of, wow, I really need to show up. I've got to show up not only with what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, but be open to trying new things, because when we get all together as a group, we are going to then be talking about, what happens in different classrooms relative to a particular topic. The other thing that I find really helpful with veteran teachers is to be paired on occasion with, we call them rookie teachers, and to give them opportunities for little mini mentorships. And by mini, I mean as small as I create a schedule where I want so-and-so to go and observe a few teachers that they feel like they would like to observe in their home environment, and also some that I think they might benefit from. And so the invitation on both parties and the expectation that's given to the brand new teacher is, you are responsible for approaching this teacher to set this up. And you are also responsible for approaching this teacher when it's over to say, what's convenient for you in terms of time that I can come and sit with you and pick your brain. And that serves purposes on both sides and can help foster the ego and light, sort of reignite that spark in a veteran teacher that feels really disconnected, that's shut off in the classroom. So easy, right, to shut our doors and not have anything to do with what's happening in the hallway. And also to get the new ones to see more of what's going on actually in the classrooms live and not just in a student teaching kind of experience.
Just two different points to add to focus on, more on the veteran teachers. But I think one of the things that we have to be careful of, that we have these institutional barriers, these systems that are set up in a way that really prevent a lot of our veteran teachers from being themselves, and most importantly, from having the agency they need to feel like they can be themselves. So having these very rigid standards for accountability, telling people that we're going to coach them and mentor them and support them, but then at the end of the day, having to give them a number rating for their performance, or having to, follow a specific district policy that, may be incongruent with some of your goals, that is problematic. And a lot of the veteran staff are very they can see through that. Teachers are the smartest people. So if there's inconsistencies with your administrative policies or practices and some of the things that you're saying, all these are great things. At the end of the day, you're still going to get teachers who are resistant to the idea to truly be themselves. So I think that's something that we all have to own and really take a look at as leaders. But the question I had for Gravity brought up an example in the book with, I think it was a more veteran teacher who was struggling, and she sort of changed the setting in a coaching way and allowed the teacher to be herself. What happens when you get into situations and you create a space for a teacher to be more themselves, and what you see you don't like or agree with, if it doesn't align with your core philosophies? Obviously, Gravity has some really strong views about literacy and other aspects of education. We all do. Most of them are in the line of being progressive. And when being yourself does not fit in with that, how do you deal with it?
I'm happy to say something about that and then throw it all out to you who are the experts. But I'm so glad you asked that question, Brad, because I was trying to find a way to ask it, and you asked it clearer than I probably would have. I've been really thinking about this because I have the privilege of getting into teachers' classroom in a coaching capacity often, like every week. And I think we have shared vision and values, and then I go in and I'm like, what is that, right? And so my first instinct as a human is sometimes to go to judgment. But one of the things I've been working on myself is to step back and say, like, so what's really going on here? And like, what are the questions I'm going to ask to try to uncover that? And I can say most of the time, what's going on is the teacher putting on a show. Almost every single time. So like, let's say I'm leading a workshop on how to confer with readers, because I spend a lot of my time doing that. And I go in and I see worksheets with red pen on them, which is like the furthest thing from what I've been talking about. What usually is they're mimicking a behavior that they had as a student, that their mentor showed to them, that they got good ratings for in some sort of evaluation prior to ever meeting me or their current administrator. Like every one of the practices I see now is like the accumulation of playing those roles all of those years. And it's so ingrained in the teachers that often like they don't even know it until we have those really reflective conversations. Because I've never met a teacher who's ever said, I really want to bore my kids with worksheets. I want to tear apart their confidence with red pen. Like, no teacher wants that. So in some ways, it's about like going back and again, really trying to have them take away the layers of the role. And my point is saying, I think it is so ingrained in us that often we don't even know we're doing it anymore. We're just mimicking like all this accumulation of practice until that's almost become more comfortable than being ourselves because that's what we're used to. That's been my experience recently. So it takes a lot of coaching and reflection to get underneath it. But I'm also really curious.
So just like I agree with some of the practice, like the example you gave, but some of the differences could be much deeper in terms of like one's epistemology about how they view like how students acquire knowledge. And there could be some really deep-seated philosophical differences that I've definitely encountered. And I can tell you that my approach is I definitely compromise. I weigh, there's a trade-off here at times where I'll say, I'll compromise my beliefs this much to get this person to come out a little bit. And then there are times where I won't. And I admit that as a leader that sometimes on the rare occasion, there are times when teachers are being themselves. And when it deals with something that's fundamental to the education of a child that I think is problematic, I will voice my disagreement. But there's a fair amount of compromise that has to take place, especially when you get someone to move a little bit or even to consider the possibility of change.
I also think a lot of it has to go back to the why, Gravity, that you've written about, right? Why are we doing this? How does it help our learners? How does it move them forward? And I think very often just having that professional conversation with colleagues around what is the why, what is the philosophy behind whatever it might be that they're doing in the classroom helps to kind of frame it for us as the administrator, but also frame it for the teacher as well. And then really thinking together about the next steps for instruction, or what is the next steps for professional learning to be able to really help ground whatever it might be, whether it's something that we think from an administrative standpoint, or something the teacher thinks that it might be something that brings us all together.
Yeah, Gravity, when you were sharing, it reminded me of one of your visits when you came here and we walked into a room and you like looked up and you were like, do they make an anchor chart every day? And it was like one of those, oh crap moments, where I thought, yeah, why do we do? And why do we do? And going back to that why, but then also just you saying that to us made us reconsider, what is the impact of it? What happens when we just stay in this same practice over and over and over again and don't consider the perspective of the teacher that has to make it, the perspective of the kid that's looking at so much work on the walls that they can't use it because it's so overwhelming. And so sometimes I think when we get to visit each other and continue growing our learning like you talk about in your book so well, I think that's when we can take a step back and not just say what's our why, but also what's the then what. So I do this and then what happens, and is that really the impact that we were going for? And I think to ask about when there's something going on that doesn't align with our view, when we can have conversation and say, well, tell me what your thinking was behind that, and start it that way, then it's less about, well, here's what I think and you think something different and I don't agree with it. But when you start with, well, what's your thinking behind it? I think that opens the door to a conversation that can then be productive, where we think about, okay, well, that's what your view is, and then what? You do an anchor chart every day, and then what? It doesn't get used because it's so overwhelming. And that it's those kinds of conversations that we're willing to have with teachers and with our students and with our colleagues that lead to sometimes a shift in what our thinking is.
I agree with that. I think so much of helping teachers to grow is really just taking a moment to pause, and rather than jumping to an assumption or an instant remedy of what we think the teacher may need to fix a problem, I think sometimes it's understanding the intention. Sometimes teachers are well intended, but maybe their execution was flawed or their understanding of a practice was flawed. And I think if we could just take a moment to say, what was your purpose, or what was the impact you were hoping that had on the students? How did that go? I equate this to thinking about when I was teaching writing in the classroom. So often students would come up to me and say, is this good, right? And when I first started teaching, I would immediately think that I had to read the entire thing and then analyze it so I could sound like I was, had these profound ideas and I could really help this child grow. And what I learned is it wasn't really about what I thought needed to fix. It was more about where the child was at in that moment and what he or she was stuck on or focused on or wanting to improve upon. And I think so much with teachers is meeting them where they are and then assessing, just as we would with our writers, maybe what's one thing that went well and what's one thing that they need next. And I think so much of that is providing that coaching and providing teachers with strategies after we've listened, after we've asked the questions. I'm thinking of one teacher in particular who came up to me this year, and I think she wanted to teach like herself, but she was afraid to because her colleagues maybe were doing something different or taking a few extra days. And once I gave the teacher, again, I come back to that idea of permission. She took a moment, she took a deep breath, and she was like, thank you. I feel like now I know what I need to do. So sometimes I wonder if teachers in the back of their heads might know, I'm not sure if this is right, but this is what I think I should be doing. And that's when they go on maybe Pinterest and they're looking up for a teacher lesson, and they're trying to make it this really meaningful lesson, when if they would just stop for a second and be more simplistic with it and make it about the learners and be responsive and make it small, I think they might meet with more success. So I know I derailed a little, but for me, it's really more about meeting them where they are and reminding them that they don't have to be more than they are in that moment.
I think some of this too is tied to sometimes an intrinsic disconnect between administration and faculty, who are in many cases, with our rapidly changing population and increasingly needy population of students and increasingly having more students that have individual needs in front of us. I think that, some of the frustration and some of the, if you want to call like dialing it in, going back to what I used to always do, what I've always done. I've worked, for X number of years, and I've created all these amazing things, and, and it was good then, and why isn't it good now? I think that some of that is, that there's an initial sort of, I see you and I hear you and I feel your pain that needs to come from whomever that supervising, coaching, department chair, principal, like whomever it is, and in all districts, it's a different configuration. I think that that's really important, that teachers want to be seen just as much as others. And I think that teaching can be a really isolating profession, more so than many others, because not only is it isolating, but of course you're giving of yourself so much. But the other piece of that then I think, and this is not a pixie dust, make everything magical kind of answer, because this is really messy work and it doesn't always go the way you might ideally want it to, is recognizing that because teachers are on average so strung out and so overtaxed and overwhelmed, and in many cases just struggling to get from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. on a regular basis, is to recognize that dialing it in is sometimes a byproduct of time, that this commodity that we just, that's our most precious one. And so what that means for me, and I'll give you an example of this, is looking at the chunks of professional development time that I have, that I'm given, and the ones that I can beg, borrow, and steal, and using them to take the ideology, the strategy, the whatever it is that we're talking about, or the thing that we want to move away from or move towards, and giving teachers an opportunity to sort of workshop that, break it down, bring the materials in that, that they're using, and say, okay, like, how can we, and so my, the example that I'll throw out there is, how can I move from this whole class text that I've been teaching forever and is a really valuable, amazing piece of literature, and everybody needs to know this, whatever this is, to transition into maybe book clubs going on in the room, and how do we do that? Like, how do we actually make that transition? Some teachers can hear about that or watch a 2 or 3 minute video clip of people talking about it and say, oh, I've got all these ideas that are firing, and within 2 days, they're doing it in their classroom. And those that either don't have that time or don't have that confidence or can't see it or envision it because it's abstract, need more practical time to break that task down. Like, what would it actually look like? What would I do? So I spend, 3 weeks on this unit now. You're saying I can still spend 3 weeks, but I can spend them differently. But what does that look like? And so for me, that means that I need to slow down as a leader with the initiatives maybe that I want to bring to the table, and say, all right, this one is really important, and I think that we can affect some systematic progress maybe if we just slow this down a little bit and give people an opportunity to create what needs to be created in some of the professional time that we have to begin with.
Brad,
Oh, go ahead, Ariel. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think Brad's question was so important. So I just wanted to kind of summarize what I was hearing so that maybe we can find some consensus here, and anyone jump in and tell me if I missed something. But it sounds like, Brad, to your question of, what do you do when you see someone who is being themselves, but maybe it's not working out the way they think it is or the way it should be for students. It's going back to those core beliefs and maybe showing some examples to contrast of saying what is working and why that's effective. Maybe bringing in some other people like mentors or PLCs or coaches or something, and then slowing down with those initiatives and maybe prioritizing, what are all the things on this teacher's plate and how can we prioritize so that they have room to focus?
Just for the record, I would say that, the majority of times it's really good for teachers to be themselves. It's just those rare occasions when it's not.
Totally. I know that about you, Brett. So it's interesting, Ariel, because I was going to summarize too, but I was jotting notes in like the phrases that struck me, and this might not be the exact like verbiage you use, but I was like, oh, I want to like make a little like cheat sheet for myself about this as a leader myself. So like kind of taking like all those ideas, one of the things that I kept thinking about was this idea from improv of yes and. So like we know the first rule of improv is that whatever the person does that you're following, that you say yes to what they do and you add to it. And I think like the best leaders can follow the improvisation. Like what is it you can say yes to that that person is authentically doing? It doesn't have to be to everything they're doing, but something that they're doing you can say yes to. And like what are you going to add to that? And I'll just give an example of there's a teacher who loves to travel, like travels like everywhere around the world. It's amazing. And that's about the only thing at the time I could value in that teacher that we had in common because everything in the day-to-day practice was very different than maybe my core beliefs. But then what I thought about was like, that's amazing that this person is willing to travel the world and learn about all different cultures and people. And how do we say yes to that more and make that gift and talent and like passion and interest like sort of flow into the rest of the teaching. And by valuing and seeing that and building that connection and that trust, I feel like that teacher then felt seen and heard enough that then we could get to the and. So I'm also not suggesting the yes and even happen in that first session. The yes might have to happen for months before we even get to the and part of it of how we're going to build with that. And then I think sort of going along with that, a lot of you are saying some versions of like, I see you. And how important that is. And not just like, you know, I see you doing this amazing job, but I also see how hard this is. I see my role and my impact on your work. I see the impact that you're leaving on students. And like, you know, like I always like go back to that Oprah quote that she's like interviewed tens of thousands of people. And the one thing every person has in common is they want to feel seen and they want to feel like their life has matter, that their life matters. So like, how do we find ways to communicate that? And no one used these three words, but like underlying all of this to me is like loving people, like letting them know that you love them. And I know that might sound like so hokey, hippy dippy, but if you don't feel cared for by the people around you, it's really hard to feel like it's safe to make mistakes and to show up and do that. And I think like that can be really easy for certain people we work with, and it can be really hard to love the people that for whatever reason are not quite so aligned with us. So to me, it's about finding that thing that I can love in them and see in them, whether you also that their ability to take a risk, to still show up every day, to do what they think is butt heads with me and push against something because they think it's what's right for kids. So super powerful that underlying all of that, whether you use those words or not, is this idea of how you love the people around you. And when you do that, you better believe they're going to love on their students even more as a result of that. So we have just like 2 minutes left, and I would love to not end with my voice, but I'd love for each of you who feel called to do this to give like the very quick, like what's one piece of advice that you would give to other leaders that you think can help create, as Michelle said, a culture of professionalism where people feel safe to show up as themselves. It could be something you've already mentioned or something you haven't mentioned yet. We probably don't have time for the long explanation, but just a little nugget of like, here's what I suggest.
This is something I was thinking about because I looked at that question directly, and something that I'm working on right now. I find that we tend to identify certain people by a particular event or strategy or personality characteristic. And one of the things I've learned, and this is through a lot of reading too, and just reflection, that people are not who they are tomorrow or the next week or year that they were before. Understand that people change, and trying to get administrators not to hold like a grudge or a really strong judgment about an individual that they work with, allow them to change their perspective about the staff that they evaluate, the staff that they coach. I think it's having that openness to seeing things in a different way. And I find that I even myself catching myself, and I say, oh, I saw this person teach, last year, and I remember this lesson, and this is not, this was not a great experience, or something I agreed with, or this person did this to this teacher in the hallway, and just allowing yourself to sort of like remove those judgments, suspend them for a time, and allowing yourself to get a better understanding of the person that you're working with.
I think my final piece would be the idea of helping teachers fly. Teachers often have the most amazing ideas. They know their students best. And when they come in with an idea or a hope or a dream, the best thing that I can do as a leader is happen, and giving them the opportunity and the monies, if I can, to be able to help that dream could become a reality. And almost every single time teachers have come up with a special idea and I've been able to support it, it's turned out to be better than all of us could have anticipated. So that would be my final thought.
My final thought would be, my advice to leaders would be to ask questions that require reflection, so the teachers can expose what their self is. And it sounds like very therapist-y, but in getting to know, and you helping getting to know them, they'll get to know themselves a little bit better. And because so many things I think we do are just on almost like an autopilot, and we don't question them. And by asking questions, we kind of bring those things to the surface, and that helps us then move forward.
That's funny you said ask questions, because I was just thinking welcome questions as well. So I think the balance of not just, asking them questions, but being willing to listen to their questions too.
One thing I'm thinking is just not losing sight of what it means to be a teacher. And maybe when we have faculty meetings or department meetings, using that time more mindfully to try to build a more positive climate and culture for growth and learning. And I'm even thinking when I remember coming into my first year as an administrator, and being filled with trepidation and not sure the best way to connect with each teacher. And I remember one of the most important things I did was I put myself out there as a teacher. And I remember modeling or doing an interactive read aloud, maybe at a department meeting, and giving teachers time to read an article and express candidly their views, even if it didn't align with what the article was stating, and providing teachers with space to be who they are so that we can learn who each member is. And then as a leader, I think our job is to kind of know who each person is distinctly and individually, so that we can see who we can be as a team and how each member contributes to that team. And one thing I value more than anything are those differences, and reminding people of why they're important and why they're a crucial part of the team, and how each individual is important to our success as a whole. I could think of moments where we'll tap into maybe this person because we're struggling with X, or tap into that person because we're struggling with Y, and knowing who those people are and what their gifts and their talents are on our team, and also people knowing what mine are and maybe where I'm vulnerable and things that I struggle with as well, because it's more about that collaborative spirit and that safe place that allows teachers to want to, improve. And also saying thank you. Thank you on a daily basis for showing up. Thank you for trying that when that was really tough. Thank you for being there for your kids when I know what's going on for you at home is really difficult right now. And I think sometimes we lose sight of what it means to be human. I know that was mentioned before, but for me, that's the core of everything I am and everything I believe in. And I always look at each individual person and try to bring us together collectively for a common purpose, but not losing sight of who we are.
I'll echo the listening. I think that comes from modeling the desire for and creating vehicles for providing feedback. And I mean, for teachers providing feedback to leaders, and leaders for to then be able to provide feedback. That professional culture is one that creates a community. Then you build a community where that's possible. And the other thing that I'll say is we need teachers to be different. If all teachers were exactly the same, we would have a really shallow perspective of the world, and the world is not a shallow, same place. You know, there's tons of differences, and our students represent all those differences. And I might be a great teacher for one kid and a horrible one for another, because they just need somebody who's different and who has a different style. And so to desire as a leader for everybody to be like me, whether it's a political leader or a teacher, is really narcissistic. It means I just want more of me in the world, rather than honoring who everybody else is, what they bring to the table. And so everything from listening to them to honoring who they are and providing ways for them to be who they are is, I think it's the ticket there.
So I'm now inspired to finish my week. Thank you, everybody, for sharing that. I could have talked to you all for hours. So I want to just end by thanking each of you and thinking about how lucky the teachers and students are to work in the schools with each of you. And for those of you who are watching this, if you're feeling inspired to join the Teach Like Yourself movement, we would love that. You can do that by using the hashtag Teach Like Yourself in social media, by joining our Facebook group, by reading and buying the book, and really by just being yourself every day and giving yourself permission to know that that is totally enough. Thank you, everybody.